Hello, my name is Frances Palmer, and I am a ceramist living in Weston, Connecticut. And I have been living out in Connecticut now for a good 35, 36 years. I'm currently sitting in my studio, which is a great old barn that we actually moved a house over from a nearby town and used the 1790s beams to construct this studio. So I feel very lucky to have all of this space to spread out into. I'm on the second floor at the moment, and all of my wheels and kilns and all of my production is done downstairs. And then when the work is finished, I bring it upstairs where I do my packing and leave all the finished pieces until I figure out what to do with them. So I actually went to school and trained as an art historian. So I am really essentially self-taught as a potter. I started when I was about 30. We had moved out from New York City to Connecticut with a newborn daughter. So I signed up for a class at a nearby art guild, and I just felt that this was my métier. I had found something that I truly love and combines all of the things that I think about and care about, and I've been doing it ever since. I was originally inspired to make ceramics because I was studying the art of the Omega workshop and the Bloomsbury artists who had moved to this beautiful house in the country outside of London, right around World War I in 1914. I was completely intrigued by them because they made the pottery for the table, they made the dishes for the table, they did the textiles, they did the wallpaper, they did the paintings. Everything in the house was surrounded by their craft. And that was something that I very much related to because I love doing so many different things with my hands, such as the cooking and entertaining and growing flowers. So they were really the first people that inspired me to start making my own work. And after that, I really gravitated to ancient ceramics such as the Cycladic or Etruscan, Egyptian. I had spent so much time in the Metropolitan Museum studying this old work. I have been going to the Neue Galerie since it opened, and there's so many objects on display and in the exhibitions over the years that I have drawn an enormous amount of inspiration. I think my favorite exhibition and the exhibition that Renee Price, the director of the Neue Galerie, invited me to do a collaboration was the Dagobert Peche exhibition that I bought. I have this catalog here, which has many, many markings in it. I was just checking it. It dates from about 2002. And he was a master, just as I talked about the Omega workshop a few minutes ago. It's a very similar kind of approach where he did the wallpaper, he did the textiles, he did the ceramics, the glass, the silver. And I am so in awe of his design sensibility. And it's something that I just spend an enormous time thinking about. There's so many examples of design in the museum that I constantly reference. And it's always exciting. So some of the images that I am looking at constantly, I love his cigarette cases. Some of the centerpieces that he did out of silver or pewter, but really the ceramics, the cutouts are the design for two bread or fruit baskets. One of the things that draws me to his designs is the intricacy, and I love thinking about doing all those cutouts, just the details. It's a lot of fun to reference. And yet what I'm making is very much my own work. It's not a copy. It's just sort of more in the spirit of. And I find that balance a really wonderful thing to look for when I'm making something. I usually do a lot of drawing before I start a piece. And it's very difficult to say, as I wrote in my book that we're going to reference later. Every piece has its own challenge, its own history. So it's really difficult for me to say. I really plan it out before I get going. So for example, the centerpiece bowl that you have in the design shop, I have to throw the bowl and watch it very carefully because I have a knife that has, it's a very narrow knife that has a blade on both sides. And I have to catch the clay at just the right moment to make those diamond-shaped cutouts. And if it's too hard, if the clay has gotten too hard, it will crack. And if it's too soft, it will bow. So it's really kind of a bit of a dance. But again, that sort of challenge is always very entertaining for me. Well, in 2018, I built a wood kiln outside. So I have 2 electric kilns in my studio, 1 gas kiln in a shed, and now I have this wood-fired kiln. And I've been spending a lot of time exploring the process of wood fire. I really love, again, it's links to ancient history and a primitive way to make pots, but yet very, very challenging. I make all the glazes for the pots. I think the underlying design aesthetic that I'm going for with the pieces that I'm making for the Neue Galerie is this beautiful graphic quality. And especially Dagobert Peche, he was the master, and that beautiful black and white spiral bowl. I love the simplicity of it. I love the boldness of it. And that's something that I try to emphasize when I'm doing the designs. And then more recently, the Styria collection, referencing a bit the Gmunder ceramic that's been produced in Austria since the 1490s. So a nice sort of cross-referencing of history. So one of the techniques I use for this is obviously I'm throwing the piece and then I'm glazing it and then adding the green glaze in very kind of natural striping with my hand. I try not to blend it out, to keep it very free-flowing and spontaneous. And then the 2 glazes sink together when they're fired and come up with this nice translucent green. These are a few of the pieces. This is a good example of the large Styria cup with that really beautiful kind of blue-greenish stripe. I've been making also these lidded jars with the stripe on the top. But this is one of the early pieces with the cutouts, very much inspired by that bowl that I showed you. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where you have to use that double-edged knife to do it just at the right moment. This was a prototype. And if you look in the Dagobert Peche, you can see those beautiful kind of card-shaped cutouts. That was really fun. I've kind of held on to that bowl. Here's a cake plate. Anyway, again, that sort of motif of the cutouts. Life in the studio. I was asked actually more like 3 years ago now, by Artisan Books to write a book about my work process and how the studio, the ceramics, the garden, but how flowers and ceramics and entertaining and all of these things that are part of my universe here, how I go about doing all of this. It does give people an idea, if you want to have some sort of a creative process, a creative strategy, some ideas about how to go about it. And the idea being that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing proposition. And I think so many people started to work from home and not get out so much. And it provided a really excellent opportunity to rethink, what is it I really want to do? If I have a creative insight, how do I get that out and yet not necessarily quit my day job? So I think it offers a lot of different ideas. I talk about my gardens. I talk about how I garden, what I plant. I talk about my ceramics, the different clay bodies, and how I respond to them. And I think it's filled with a lot of good information. I started really focusing on growing cut flowers, especially because I wasn't getting into New York City so much. So I have 2 very large gardens. One on each side of my studio. One is in an old tennis court, and the flowers are, I originally learned to take photographs to document the pots, but over time, the flowers and the ceramics have sort of an equal weight. And so I do all the photography. I did all the photography for the book. And I love to post pots and flowers on Instagram. And I feel one of the things that's so important is the daily practice. So the daily practice of making pots, the daily practice of working in the garden, the daily practice of taking a photo, just keeping all of the sort of the balls in the air simultaneously, and just by repetition, constantly exploring what can be done. Yes, my handle on Instagram is pretty straightforward. It's Frances, Frances Palmer. Frances Palmer. Thank you.